Hello. Oh, thank you very much. I am Chris Schmidt from greyscalegorilla.com, where we do tutorials and we do training, but mostly we make tools. We try and make tools to help improve your workflow and just speed things up and just make things a little bit easier for everybody. Let's see, I do a bunch of stuff. We like the tips and the tricks and the tutorials. I also run Ask GSG, which is a live stream that we run every Wednesday where for 2 hours on Twitch, I just answer questions from people. We try and recreate different motion graphics pieces, different daily renders, stuff from photos, just general Cinema4D questions. It's my way of kind of staying a little bit more fresh in the industry since I don't do too much production work these days. But today, we are doing a little bit of a reprisal of one of my favorite tutorials ever from a couple years ago, where we're going to spend the next 50 minutes just trying to cram in as many tips, tricks and techniques as we can in the next 50 minutes. Just things I think are cool that maybe not a lot of people don't know about, and I think they'll pretty much be something for everybody. So why don't we go ahead and jump right on in.
First up, we've got Super Polyclean. So Super Polyclean, we've got this big old fancy complicated model. It's actually not very complicated. It started out as a cube, and I just kind of greebled it up by grabbing a couple polygons and hitting D for extrude and extruding that out, maybe extrude twice, and I grab this top one, extrude that out, maybe grab these, hit D for extrude, pull those out, and just doing a whole series of extrudes like this, extrudes and inner extrudes, and just, kind of making it a little bit more complicated of a model. And it's pretty fun to do that kind of thing, just to greeble something up manually. But you'll see that we've actually got a lot of extra points here, a lot of excess polygons. It's just a big old mess. And we don't want that. Now, something you might do, and the way you might have done this in the past, was to select all of your polygons and then right-click, and we have untriangulate. But learn your shortcuts, everybody. Super duper important. And the best way to learn your shortcuts is to force yourself to type it. So even though I've already done the trouble of right-clicking and finding triangulate, don't click the button. Hit escape and see what the shortcut is. And I actually want to do the little gear. So we actually have to hit Shift U. So the shortcut for that, hit escape. I'm going to hit U, Shift U, and it's going to pop open that menu. So that's a good way of learning your shortcuts. But we want to make sure that we turn on Create N-gons. And when I hit OK, then boom, it's going to super duper clean up the model. And you see all those edges have been gotten rid of. But the problem is it hasn't gotten rid of the points. If I click on points, we've got all these extra points here. And these are still affecting the model. And it's creating a lot of weird excess N-gons. Let's go ahead and make sure our N-gons are turned on. And you can see that there's still a ton of N-gons here. Now, we do expect N-gons, but there's a lot of unnecessary ones. So let's go ahead and undo a few times, and let's actually look at the Super Poly Clean technique. Now, important thing to note is this will mess up your UVs if you've got it all UV'd, but if you don't, we're going to go ahead and use the Poly Reduction tool. You've probably used this before for various purposes, but if I drop it as a child of the object, it's going to be trying to get rid of tons of polygons, and you see it starting to mess up the model. But if instead we tell this to do a poly or a reduction strength of 0, then let's go ahead and bake that down. You can right click and current state to object. I also like just making a connect object, hold down Alt or Option, that makes it apparent, make it editable, and now you see it's immediately baked that down. If I click onto our, I'm going to delete the font tag. If I click onto our object, you'll see that all of those extra points have gone away. The only points that remain are the ones that are actually giving us detail on the model. So now if I were to select all and right click, actually don't right click, do the shortcut we learned, which is U, Shift U, we can now untriangulate that. And now if we go to points, you see that we only have points that are relevant to the model. Very, very clean setup. Every point that we don't need is gone. Every polygon we don't need is gone. Every edge we don't need is gone. We have gotten rid of everything that we can get away with getting rid of. And if we were to go ahead, and this is actually a really good technique for when you're going to bevel something, especially parametrically. If I were to throw in this bevel, it's going to give us very, very clean bevels on everything. You can get some really weird looking bevels depending on what your geometry is, but after we do the Super Poly Clean technique, we're going to get super clean bevels out of this model. So I really like using that. It's really useful for very geometric shapes when you just want to kill off a bunch of that. And then, I don't know, it just works really well. Let's move on to the next one. Next up, we've got separate segments. This one's pretty straightforward, but it can be handy if you're not familiar with it. I've got the NAB logo here. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And you can see it's just a spline, one object. All these are one spline. Let's say I want to split this N off into its own object. We want it to be its own extrude. We want to have a cloner, just clone onto that letter. Who knows what. But I'm going to go ahead and go to point mode, and let's go ahead and select any given point on the N, and let's select all of the connected points. Now, you don't want to go and drag and select all these. That takes too long. If we just click on one point, we can hit the shortcut UW, which is select connected, or you can go into your select menu and go find it here. But once again, learn the shortcut, and it is UW. And now we want to split it, which I think is under mesh. But once again, the shortcut that we want to use, UW, and the split command is UP. So that's split. We've now split that object into another object here, but you'll see that the original point still remains. So I'm going to hit delete. So now we've got a separate object that is now the N. And once again, if we're doing this quickly, I could, click on the model, grab the point, UW, UP, delete. And now I've separated that out into its own model pretty quick and clean to get that out. But let's say we just wanted every segment to be separated out as a separate issue. We just go back to, I undid, now we're back here with one giant one. I'm just going to right click, and there is no shortcut for this, but there is a button for explode segments. Click on that, and now there's an empty spline object, and each of these children is one of the splines. Every unconnected segment has become its own. So that's just another way of exploding all of them out if you don't want to split out a specific part. And that split technique, the UW UP delete trick, works on polygon objects as well. Moving right along, we've got volumetric detail. So what do we got here? Well, I've got a bunch of helixes and spheres that I fed into the Cinema4D meta ball, and we get this really cool shape going on. Now I want to deal with making a volumetric light. So let's go ahead and get rid of the sky so we can see the volumetric light really well. Let's go ahead and create the light. And all we need to do is turn visible light from none to volumetric. And now when I hit render, we're going to get a nice big old volumetric light looking great. But you might see, hopefully the resolution is good enough, you can see some artifact going on over here because we have such tiny little detail, the light can't quite figure itself out. So there's a setting to fix that, and for a long time I didn't know what it was. And that setting is inside of light, visibility, and it is sample distance. Now, before we do it the right way, let's go ahead and make it even worse. I'm going to jump it up to above 100 and render again, and you're really going to see the pattern breaking up and not quite working correctly. Now, the way the volumetric light actually works, I think, is it creates a series of concentric spheres, each one getting bigger than the last, going out to the outside of this fall off. So it's out to here, and right now we're saying every 111 units create another sphere, and then it's kind of catching where the light intersects it. So if we make this a smaller number, it used to be 25, let's drop it down to 10, so it's more than double what it originally was. We now have more than enough segments for this to look smooth all the way through. Now, if you had a very, very detailed object or very, very small holes in detail, then you can go smaller and smaller, smaller. Just keep in mind that the smaller you make your sample distance, the longer it will take to render. But that is fixing the volumetric light detail. Next up, we've got interface modes. Okay, interface modes. We've got a cloner here, and this cloner is being fed a torus, and it's just a really simple setup where these are getting cloned and making more of them. But we want to talk about interface modes. So I'm going to jump into the transform tab over here, and we're going to change a couple settings. We're going to change the way some settings look. Now, the first one I'm going to do is we just got this weight slider. We're not actually going to be really using it, but if I right click on it, and actually, you might be familiar with this technique if you've played with user data, creating your own user data for Expresso and whatnot. But we can actually do this to any parameter. If I right-click on this weight and go to User Interface, I can change this to, right now it's a float slider, but I can say I just want it to be a float. And now the slider went away. Or I can right-click on it and say I want it to be a float slider, no edit field. Now the number went away. And every parameter has different ways of being displayed. So we have, maybe this one's a little more useful. We can go to the animation play, and this is a drop-down button. But I can right-click on that one and change the user interface. And it is right now on integer, but we can change that to something like radio buttons. And now it's still the same control, but we're actually seeing all the options live in the viewport. And we can just click on it quicker without having to click twice to see the drop-down. Now, the one where I think it's most useful is on something like color. On color, if we right-click and go to user interface, there's actually something called show subchannels. So if I click on that, it's actually going to create the actual parameters that are being recorded when you record color. We've got our RGB. So as we change our color here, you see that these numbers are correspondingly changing, and we can individually record on red or green or blue to change this color. And no matter what mode we're in, these are the actual numbers that are feeding in. So that's a cool way of getting access to your individual parameters. And something else to note is across scene files and even in the same file and even across all scene files, if we make another cloner, there's a brand new cloner, you see that those settings, the interface changes were remembered. I actually don't want them to be that way, so why don't we go ahead and set them back? Don't show the subchannels. Go ahead and show our float slider and put this back to integer. So I put them back, but you can go and change the interface and the way things look through all the different parameters throughout Cinema4D. When in doubt, this is an important one, everybody. We got a philosophy over here at Grayscale Gorilla, and that is when in doubt, use a connect object. The connect object in Cinema4D is probably the single most useful thing. I actually like thinking about the connect object as a parametric make editable, and it also doubles as a parametric optimize or weld. So what do we want to do here to show it off? There's 1,000 examples we could do, but here's just one. I've got an end side right here. And let's go ahead and create a cloner, and I'm going to feed this into the cloner. Let's set the cloner to the R18 new feature of honeycomb array, and I'm going to set it to lie down flat on the ground for orientation. So we set that to Y. So now I got a nice little honeycomb pattern going here. Let's go ahead and create a extrude. And let's feed that in. And you're going to see that only the first object is actually being acknowledged. That's not what we want. And to further show the problem, let's go ahead and create a loft. I'm going to feed this into the loft. And that is not at all what we want. If I were to hit NB, the shortcut, so we can actually see our polygons, you can see what's actually happening is this end side is being lofted to that end side, which is being lofted to that one, to that one, to that one, to here, and then shooting across to there and going all the way through them. This is seeing the cloner as a series of splines instead of one spline. And we can demonstrate that by making our cloner editable. And you can see that it's actually feeding it a whole bunch of splines. So instead of that, why don't we select our cloner, and I'm going to hold down Alt or Option. If you didn't know this, that will make any object you create become a parent of the currently selected object. So I'm going to hold down Alt Option, click on Connect, and you see that the Connect object has become a parent of the cloner, but still a child of the loft, and it is now feeding it in as a single spline object, and it's now giving us what we wanted. It's actually turning each of these into a single spline. And you can tell by making our cloner editable that that is now a spline that's being returned, not a series of splines. So very, very useful. When in doubt, when something seems like it should be working and it's not working the way you think it would, like it's not cloning onto the right thing, and maybe the sweep should be happening on it, something. Whenever it doesn't seem to be working, try throwing a connect object in the hierarchy in the right spot. There's a good chance it will fix it. Time fall off. This one is really cool. I've never really had a good place to show this technique off, and I feel like it's really powerful, and if you think it's something cool, I want to see how you used it. So I've got a clock here. It's a very simple bit of geometry, super clean, and there's some keyframes on it that's just making the hour hand and the second hand spin. Just some straight up simple keyframes. So let's go ahead and create a MoGraph cloner, and we'll throw the clock into the cloner, and let's set that to, again, honeycomb array. And let's zoom out, and you can see we got a wall of clocks now. Very fun. Now, there's a good chance you're already familiar with this, but you might not be. Actually, let's leave it playing. If I grab our cloner, it's already selected, so the effector will automatically apply it. I'm going to click on a random effector, and I don't want it to affect the position. I want it to randomly affect the time. So as I grab this and change it, you'll see that every time is now different. It has been offset in time by 45 frames forward or potentially up to 45 frames backwards. 45. So they're moving forward and backward in time to offset them. So you probably knew about that time offset. It's pretty powerful for, offsetting and changing a keyframed animation. But let's try something a little bit different. The reason that these are all playing through right now the way they are is on the cloner, under transform, you see we have an animation mode, and it's set to play. It is playing the keyframes. We could actually set that to fixed. And fixed means it's not changing at all. These are not animating anymore in spite of them being keyframed. So you can see even with our timeline playing, they're not moving. So now what that means is we can click on our cloner, and I'm going to feed it. This time we use a plane effector, and I don't want to affect the position. I want to affect the time. So I can actually grab this time and move it up. And actually we could keyframe our time offset if we wanted to. We could keyframe that, and it's offsetting the time. We could also move this up to some larger amount of time, and we could also, if we wanted to, animate the strength. And now you can see this being animated via the strength parameter. So it's kind of a way of remapping your time. But where I think it's really useful is if we leave it up to 100%, we still have our time offset. Let's go to fall off and feed it a linear fall off. Let's have it go on X. So we'll go X plus. Let's give it a full fall off, and let's make the fall off a lot bigger. So I'm going to grab this and move it off to the side, and you'll see that's all the time is 0. And let's even hit play. You see they're not moving. But, and even if we pause it, if I grab this and start pulling this in, as the fall off gets to the axis of the object, the time starts moving. What we have done is we have made it so we are no longer controlling these clocks with time. We're controlling these clocks with a fall off. And I think that is very powerful. These clocks, these fall offs can be whatever we want. We could go and set this to a spherical fall off. So now the time is offset based on the center of this clock striking it. We could invert that time, and now all the time, does it, I guess maybe invert's not going to work there. But like as these are animating, they're each spinning based on their position in the fall off. So we're controlling animation not with time, but with fall off. And I feel like there's a lot of potential applications for that in different motion graphics pieces. So yeah, if you think of something cool to do with that, make sure you let me know. Texture preview. Okay, so texture preview. What are we talking about in this one? Well, yeah, let's go ahead and open up this file, and I'm going to make a new material, and let's pop it open. I'm actually, I like double-clicking my material and going into this material editor. I just like it being a little bit bigger as opposed to the attribute manager, and that's actually a funny holdover from, I've been using Cinema4D since version 6, and in version 6, there was no attribute manager, and to do materials, you had to pop the window open. So, let's go ahead and turn off color, turn off reflectance, and we're just going to use the luminance channel. Let's throw in a noise. So, we've talked about this stuff before. One cool thing is you get this little drop down. I didn't know about this for years. You can click on that and you get a nice little preview of all the different noises. So you're not dependent on these weird names. You can actually see a little preview of them. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Stupple. And Stupple's a cool looking texture. I like the way that looks. The preview is a little hard to see, so I'm going to right click and let's make it maybe a square. I'm going to set it to a plane. It's really tiny though. I want to see it bigger. So, we could right click and look, we're set to default, but there's a huge. So let's go ahead and make it huge. Huge isn't very huge. But what you can do is right click and you can say open window. And we have now actually, it defaulted that because it remembered me doing it. Usually it's going to pop out to be something kind of small like that. But you can actually make the window as large as you want to. And now we're getting a giant full res preview of what that texture looks like. And Stupple is a lot more detailed and subtle than I thought it would look. Got a little bit of a Van Gogh painting thing going. Kind of cool. I can go ahead and dock that if I wanted to. Any changes we make to this material, we can make it bigger and we could crop in some of the colors a little bit. Let's get the contrast going. And it's going to show us a nice big high-res version of that. Now, if I were to click another material, it's not going to update. It's going to continue showing the other material. But if we want to see it, all we do is click on this little bubble and drag it there. And now it's going to update that to the one that we're currently looking at. Now we can make changes to that one if we wanted to. So, and it's going to update all of those. So, lots of cool giant view control of being able to see our different noises and textures in a big giant viewport. Cloner blend. All right, this is a big one. I've talked about this in a full tutorial, but I want to kind of separate it out right here because I think this is great and everybody should be using this technique. So let me just talk about the setup a little bit. I've got a null here, and inside of it is a cloner with these very, very simple trees. Just a sphere with a bevel and a cone. We've got the grass, which is just a couple of end sides, the bottom one in the displacement, so that's a little bit deformed. And then we've got a dirt, which is just another end side being extruded up to give us this base of dirt. Now let's go ahead and add some randomness to these trees. They're a little boring right now. They already get randomly getting their color from that one, but let's go ahead and give it some random position and scale. So let's go ahead and make sure our tree cloner is selected. MoGraph, Effector, Random. And yes, I want this randomness, but I don't want it on Y. So let's zero out the Y so they're just moving left and right. And let's go ahead and also give ourselves some random scale. Definitely need that. Turn on uniform scale. Let's go ahead and start dragging it down or up. It's going positive and negative, so they'll be affected similarly if we go positive or negative. So I get some bigger ones, some smaller ones. Let's go ahead and give it a little rotation. Why not? Let's spin them around. Just give it an arbitrary number there. And let's go ahead and add another effector on there. I'm going to click on Tree Cloner, and we've got the awesome new R18 push apart effector. Let's go ahead and create that, and you're going to see it's going to push all the trees apart from each other, which is great. It's just too far. I don't want it to be 100, so let's drop it down to something like 10, which is too small, but now we can start pulling it up until we see the trees actually push each other out of the way. And let's not go that far, just enough so they're all on the land, but now they're no longer touching. So awesome. We've got this little random tree setup. Now, this is important. I want this random effector to join my simple hierarchy here. So I got my little hex hierarchy. So now let's go ahead and make a bunch of clones of these. So I'm going to create a cloner, and let's throw in the hex into the cloner. And let's change it once again to honeycomb array. And I'm going to set them to lie flat on the ground on Y. And then you can see we kind of got this world of hexes, a little bit of a Minecraft vibe going. But you'll see right away the problem is that we've got a lot of repetition. It's doing the exact same thing. We've got these rows of trees look exactly the same. Now, the way I used to do it, and the way you might be doing it, is you might take this hex and make a duplicate of it, and maybe take this random effector and give it a different random seed. So we'll tick that up one, and now you can see that we have two different types of hexes we're feeding it. And so it's breaking up the pattern. Let's go ahead and give it a third one. Let's give it another random seed. So now we're feeding it 3 different source materials. And now that we have 3 different ones, like it's starting to break up the pattern a lot. It's actually hard to see the repetition. It is there. Like you can see, like we got all those in a row, but it broke it up reasonably well. But there's a better way. I'm going to go ahead and just leave our one hex, so we're back to the original single one. And let's go ahead and make one duplicate. There's just one. Now, what's happening right now in the cloner is it's iterating between every single duplicate. So right now they're identical. But what I'm going to do is tell it to blend between all of the children. So we got 2 of them, so it's going to blend between them. Now, if we go inside one of the hexes, it's going to blend between every single parameter, including including tags. But I'm going to click on one of the random effectors. And before we were just changing the seed by ticking it up by 1, but instead, let's make it a huge difference. Right now we're on like 12,000, but I'm going to set up to like 22,000. Big old giant huge number. And now what's happening is it is blending between one seed and another. So that means every single one of these clones is being fed a unique random seed, thus making each and every one of these completely unique as compared to its neighbor. And we put such huge numbers in there. I think there's 49 clones here. There's probably like 100 seed changes between each one. And as long as that number is bigger than the number of clones, each clone will be completely unique as compared to all the other ones. So look at that, no pattern whatsoever. This can be applied to a lot of different things. Whenever you want any kind of randomness throughout all of your clones, this technique can get you there. And I just want to show you that the technique can go even a little further. You'll see that on our dirt pattern, you can see it really well here. They're identical, doing the exact same thing over and over again. We got the lump, the lump, the lump, all the same. So what we can do is go to, what are we on here? If we go to the grass, this is being generated by this displacer, and both of them have it. And the displacer is referencing this texture tag right here. So if we drastically change one of the coordinates on the second texture, make it really different, let's jump it up to like 55,000, huge difference. It is now blending between those 2 textures, and there's such a big difference between them that we're now getting a completely different, unique layout on every single one of these. So it is now completely random as far as it being visual. I feel like this is applicable to so many different things. And once again, if you figure out a really cool place to use this, I'd love to see your end result. Quick draw splines. So when I need to draw some sort of more complicated spline for something, I love creating a plane and then making it editable. So now we've done that, why don't we go to edge mode, and then there is a very nifty tool, and the shortcut is UM, but that is just draw path, or I guess path selection. So once again, learn your shortcuts. So I don't even know where you'd find that. Probably under mesh somewhere, maybe under spline, maybe under tool. See, I don't even know where they are. It's always all about shortcuts. So it's hiding in here somewhere, and I don't know where. But force yourself to learn the shortcuts by hitting UM. But anyway, now we're drawing a path selection. So what that means is I'm actually drawing some splines. So let's say we needed some sort of techno lightning. So we're going to go and draw this shape up. And we'll just keep going. And you see, this is a very quick way of drawing the shape. And I just want to show you, let's say I mess up and go too far over. I can actually just backtrack and it'll erase that back out again. So now I've got my little piece of techno lightning here. And all I have to do is click Shift-C and then type in the word edge. And now we have an edge to spline. I can click on that. And it's going to create a spline for us. And let's go ahead and hide our plane. You now see I have a spline I was able to draw out very quickly, where drawing that manually would have probably taken a pretty long time. And I actually use this for a lot of different shapes. When you're going and you're drawing inside the shape, like any kind of spline really, but let's say I need to sweep a particular trough type shape, I could just go ahead and draw that trough shape right here like that, and that could become the track. Maybe I'm doing like a Hot Wheels track and I need this type of shape. I can hold down Command or Control and erase out those lines. So now I've got that shape, and I can just Shift-C, edge to spline, and now that has been broken out as those edges, very quick to draw, and that would be kind of a pain to do if you were making it otherwise. So quickly drawing your splines this way, very useful. Expresso, copy, and paste. So there is an interesting and kind of quirky thing with Expresso about the way you duplicate it. So first of all, let me show you the scene we've got here. I've got an Expresso set up here. Now, the controls are on this flicker null, and there's just two controls: seed, a random seed, and map the brightness. And that is being fed into this Expresso tag, and you'll see it's very simple. It's these flicker controls being fed into a random noise, and that's where the seed goes, and that noise is being fed out to a range mapper, and the number being fed to the range mapper is fed through the spline, and then that is being fed out into the intensity of the light. So the end result of this is I can hit play, and we're automatically getting a flickering light. And the controls are really neat, where I can just maybe grab this bright point and move it down halfway. So now what I'm saying is I don't want the light to ever get super bright. It should go from black to middle brightness. Or I could say, you know what, I want lots of discrepancy. So like it's almost never fully white and it's almost never fully black. Or I can pull white way in, and now only occasionally we're going to flicker down to black. And of course, we can keep changing the random seed and get different layouts on that. So let's kind of put that back somewhere a little bit more flickery. And let's talk about duplicating things. So if I were to duplicate this light, you would probably hold down Command or Control and make a duplicate of it. Now we got a second light, and I could scoot it off to the side. Now, like we've already talked about, the controls are actually not on the light, but on the separate flicker null. So both lights are doing the exact same thing, and they're both responding to this same these same flicker controls. So if I were to pull this way down, you can see both of them are doing the exact same thing, and they're both a lot dimmer. So that's happening that way. But let's say we want to control them separately. Well, if I grab flicker and the light, and I hold down Control or Command and duplicate both of them, you would think that the second light, which I'll scoot over again, the second light would be associated with the flicker controls that we duplicated, but it's actually not. If I change this all the way down to black, you'll see that it's still doing the exact same thing the other one is doing. It is actually still referencing that same single flicker. So whatever I change on this one, both of them will change identically. Why don't we brighten that one up instead? So we just got a little bit of flicker going. But those are both being controlled by that same flicker. If you actually want to duplicate the controls and have them be separate, what you have to do is not Command or Control drag copy. We need to do a full-on copy and paste. So Command C, Command V. And it's as if you were pasting it to a new file. It's saying, okay, I need to just work with what I've got, like in the copy. And it now knows to reference that new flicker. So let's go ahead and grab that light, and I'm going to pull it off to the side. And let's grab both of them and put them both inside here. If I grab the second flicker and maybe make it dimmer and put a different seed on there, you'll now see those two lights are doing separate things. Let's go ahead and throw a couple other, make another paste. I'll just hit paste again. Let's grab this one and move it further down. Let's hit paste one more time, and let's move it even further down the hallway. And now I can grab each of the different flickers and give it a different random seed, completely randomly. So each one has its own random seed. You see they're all blinking. It gets a little obnoxious here, but that's where it's cool. We can grab all of our flicker controls. It'd probably be a good idea to have them all hang out next to each other, so it's really easy to select all of them like that. But now you'd be like, okay, too much flicker. Let's go ahead and make that a little more subtle. So it's just a little bit of flickering, not quite enough power getting to them. A little bit of a storm coming in, or you could pull them all down. It's a little dimmer. It's a little more spooky. Or, you know, a little more subtle. But now you see how all the controls have been separated with the copy and paste. So sometimes you might want all the objects to be controlled via one control, so copy it one way, or sometimes you want the controls to be copied as well, so copy and paste it the other way. Effectors post dynamics. So you might know that when you're using effectors and dynamics, the effectors are calculated before the dynamics. So let's go ahead and check that out. I've got this nice little bottle. It's got some thickness. Let's go ahead and grab a nice R18 Voronoi fracture, throw our bottle in, looking good. I just want a few more subdivisions, so why don't we go ahead and jump that up to like 55. Cool, a little more broken. I've already got a floor with a dynamics tag. Let's go ahead and grab our fracture object here. Let's throw a rigid body tag on there and hit play. Boom! All the pieces fall on the ground. They're going to slide away. The friction's really low, but I actually want them to slide away like that. So cool, they're sliding away. Now, let's say the client, or I want to have these scale down as they slide further away. So as it falls down, it should be full, and as it slides away, we want them to shrink. So let's go ahead and give that a pause, rewind, and let's go ahead and add an effector in here. So I'm going to add I've got the Voronoi fracture selected, click MoGraph, effector, plane effector. It's going to move it up. I don't want that. Turn that off. I want to scale. I want to be a uniform scale. I want to be a uniform scale of -1. Boom. It's going to disappear because they've all been shrunk down to 0. Now, let's go into our fall off, and I actually don't want it to be everywhere. I want it to be a box fall off, and that's looking pretty good. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. So let's have it fit the size of our box a little bit better. And we need it to be a lot taller, so I'm going to set it up to like 1,000. So now it's super big and tall, completely encapsulating the object, but it's doing the opposite of what we want. The inside is erasing out to 0, and then the outside it's going to exist. So let's invert it. So now it's inverted, so now it does exist, and when it falls outside of it, it should disappear. It should scale down to 0. So let's go ahead and hit play, and nothing's different. Why isn't it different? It's not having any effect on it. And that's because the effectors are calculated before the dynamics. So let's go ahead and fix this. So I'm going to click on our Voronoi fracture, and let's go ahead and delete this out from the effectors. Now the plane effector still exists, but it's not doing anything at all. So here's what we need to do. I am going to duplicate, copy and paste our Voronoi fracture. So we have 2 copies of it. I'm going to take this one, the original one, let's go ahead and call it source. So that is our source material that we're going to be referencing. Now we've got our secondary. Let's hide our source, so we're not going to see it or render it. And let's go ahead and delete our dynamics tag off of our copy. So if I were to hit play right now, nothing is happening. But if we unhide this one, you can see that those pieces are indeed still sliding across the ground, being dynamic. So what we need this fracture to do is to do whatever this dynamic one is doing. So how do we do that? We're going to do that with a MoGraph effector inheritance. So let's feed that top one an inheritance. So under the effector tab, there is an object. It wants to be fed an object. So let's go ahead and feed it the source fracture. Feed that right in there. And if I play, nothing's going to happen because we have to turn on morph motion object. Let's turn that on, and boom, instantly you see all of our pieces are slid all over the place. But of course, this is this object, but there's no dynamics tag. It is not dynamic. It's just doing whatever the dynamic object did. So what that means is I can now grab our new fracture, go to the effectors tab, and let's drag back in our fall off, our scale down with the fall off. And now let's go ahead and hit play. And now you'll see as it's around, as the pieces slide away, they're scaling down to 0 because this shape is exactly referencing its source, which has an identical number of pieces, but there is no dynamics, which means it's just the effectors, which means it can now see that effector as the pieces move further away. So that is a way of affecting the dynamic object after the dynamics have calculated. Displace deformer. I love the displace deformer. Most weeks out of the year, I do a live show called Ask GSG, where people come in and they ask questions about Cinema4D or cool projects they've seen, motion graphics pieces, maybe Behance or projects or different daily renders people have created. And I am shocked at how often the answer to a big part of those questions is the displace deformer. And I just want to show you a quick 2 things with this displace deformer that I love using. So we've got a boring old sphere here. I'm going to go ahead and create a displaced deformer, and let's make it a child. And let's go ahead and feed it a noise, and the noise is going to be too small, so let's jump it up to like 500, and let's grab the displacer and tell it should push way out, and let's grab our sphere and give it a whole bunch more segments so we can actually see what it's doing. So there we go. A whole bunch of nice segments going on. Now, the thing that the displacer is doing, and if I pull the strength in and out, you'll see that's just taking these individual points and it's pushing them straight out based on the vertex normal, based on the normal of the object. So that pretty much only means it can push out and in of its original position, which means we can never really get any kind of concave effect going whatsoever. And I feel like it's a very simplistic way of displacing. It becomes very visually obvious that you're just displacing on there. But if we take this displacer and make a duplicate of it, I'm going to hold down Command or Control and make a identical child after that displacer, we are now doing the same displacement twice. But the second one is based off of the already displaced shape, which means it can now push outward. So you can see that these are actually overlapping each other. It's pushing outward. We're getting some concave shapes going where it's actually digging in and pushing out in different spots. I just feel like it makes it so much more automatically dynamic. And you gotta be careful about the scale and how far they are. And maybe the strength's a little bit high, so if we go a little bit lower, but even just doing a little one, you can already see how there's a more of an interesting bulge going on there. The shapes are changing and deforming and bulging out more, where just a single one is pushing out a little bit, but the second one makes it so much more visually interesting. So that's one technique for using a displacer. Let's go ahead and check out another. In this one, we are using that same metaball object we used in an earlier technique, and we want to go and smooth this out. Now, I used pretty low settings inside the metaball because I want to run relatively quick. I didn't want there to be that many polygons or take that long to smooth it out. So I do want to smooth this out. So let's go ahead and create a Cinema4D smoothing deformer, and I'm going to make it a child of the metaball, and boom, it's going to make everything very smooth. It already looks so much better. Look how smooth everything got. And our polygons are going to look so much more evenly distributed. That's the shortcut NB to be able to see your edges. I'm going to hit NA, so we go back to the nice smooth one. Now, the problem is all of our thin spots and all over the place, these have gotten almost infinitely thin. They got super skinny. We don't want to lose that nice thickness that we had to it. So let's go ahead and create a displacer. I'm going to make it calculate after the smoothing by making it a child after the smoothing. And let's go ahead and do some displacement here. It's not going to do anything until we feed it some sort of image. So what image should we feed it? Well, I'm going to feed it the full color white. So under shader, I'm going to feed it color, and it's just white. Now what that's doing is it's grabbing every single point, every single polygon, and saying bulge outward based on your normal. Now it's a little far as compared to what our original shape was. So let's drop that down to like 4, and you can see that we've now smoothed out all of our polygons. This looks so much smoother, but we've re-thickened it up parametrically by using our displacer, just a white displacer. It's a way of inflating an object or deflating it. If you set this to a negative strength or feed it a black color, it will actually deflate a little bit or inflate if you use white. And it's just I mean, that's applicable in a lot of different situations. We are now parametrically inflating or deflating this, and we can even go beyond 100. It's going to start getting bigger. If we did that, we probably want to use another smoothing deformer to make some of those lumps go away. But a really cool way of inflating objects. Okay, we've got the Riaffector Erase. So in R18, they introduced a new effector called the Riaffector, and it's pretty complicated. There's a lot of really cool things it can do, and I highly suggest going on Cineversity and checking out Donovan's video about the Riaffector, because you can see a bunch of other things it can do. But one way, a simple way I like thinking about it, is using the Riaffector as an erase effector, erasing out effects. So we've got a simple cloner here. I'm just cloning a cube onto a cylinder to kind of get this brick pattern going. So I've got a push apart effector and a random effector, and they both have a linear fall off. So if I had to grab this and drag them through, you see they're going to push apart from each other, and the random rotation is going to randomly rotate them a little bit. So this can just kind of pass on through. So you see that animation has happened. So now what we can do, if we want to erase this out, is select our cloner, and I'm going to make a MoGraph effector Riaffector. And the instant I click that, it is returned back to its original shape. In fact, it's completely overriding everything. So right now, this one doesn't seem to be doing anything because the Riaffector is erasing it all out. Now, under the effector tab, we do have strength here, and I can actually start pulling this back, and we could actually just we could keyframe this to erase out all the other effectors that have been in there, but it's so much more interesting to do a fall off. So let's go ahead and go to the fall off tab in the Riaffector, change the shape to linear. Let's go ahead and set that to maybe something like Y minus. Let's give it a full fall off, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this up above. So now you can see it's not erasing anything out, but as I pull the effector in, it's erasing out all the things the other effectors did and putting it back to its original shape. So we're actually destroying this from left or from right to left, but then I'm erasing it back in from top to bottom. Two different ways of approaching it. But the Riaffector can actually get more specific than that. In the Riaffector, we can go ahead and tell it to only affect certain properties inside the transform. We could say, you know what? Don't affect the position, only erase out the rotation. So as I pull this down, you see it's all randomly rotated, but as I pull it through, they're all going to straighten out. I could do the opposite. Only affect the position, not the rotation. So now this is erasing out the position, but the rotation is remaining. And then we could make a second Riaffector and erase out the rotation from a different orientation if we wanted to. We could even start layering up additional effectors. I could go and grab the cloner and let's feed another effector in. Let's go and just grab, let's just grab up random. It's going to explode all the pieces out, and let's go ahead and randomly rotate them again. And let's grab the scale, and we'll uniformly scale them randomly so they'll get bigger. So we've done that, but let's go ahead and grab this Riaffector that we already have, copy and paste it. So we got a new one. Let's go ahead and reapply it. So I'll drag it into the Effectors tab, put it after the random. And now we have a second Riaffector, and this one is only, well, actually, it's erasing out. Actually, yeah, it only erases out what comes afterward, unless I forgot the rotation. No, it does return it to everything. So we are now erasing out all of the other ones. So we can actually do this multi-step thing. So I'm not going to keyframe it now, but let's all do all of these in order. So we could do an animation where we grab these two effectors and they pass through this object and explode it outward. And then the Riaffector with a fall off goes and animates down and then returns them in, but not the rotation. And then this random rotation gets animated up and explodes the pieces out again, this poor wall. And then we have another Riaffector, which we have come in from a different direction, but I just got it up here. We can pull that down and re-erase that one out, and we go back to our original shape, and we can add in as many effectors as we want again. So once again, we can turn off the individual parameters. We could even limit it to only specific effectors that it's erasing. So that's a super simple way of using the Riaffector, and I think it's really powerful having something that can so easily, and with fall-offs, erase out other effectors. We've got executions. So back in when I was using R6 and versions back in that time, back in the sidebar, there used to be a whole bunch of execution commands, and then they seemed to disappear. And I thought they actually removed them from Cinema4D, but I recently rediscovered them. So I've got a very simple scene here. I've got a sphere that was made editable and it's keyframed, and I've got a hair on it. And over here we got a parametric sphere with a displaced deformer on it and more hair. If I hit play, they're just going to animate around. They're just wiggling, doing their own thing. Not terribly fancy. Now, if I go to my tools, there's a submenu here called execution. I'm going to tear that off, so we've got this here. So we've got a bunch of different buttons that control whole aspects of Cinema4D. So I could actually turn off animations. So all of the keyframes have been turned off and will no longer play. In fact, they even remain wherever it was when I clicked the button. And next up, we have expressions. That would actually turn off all the Expresso and some of the code. We have generators. If I turn that off, our parametric sphere has turned off, and any parametric objects, any geometry parametric objects will turn off. We have use deformers. If I turn that off, our displaced deformer has turned itself off in the entire scene. And then we've also, before I click it, I got to show you. I'm going to zoom in here. This is one of the most amazing icons in Cinema4D. Look at that head of hair. Like, look at them even looking up. They're definitely showing off their head of hair. But anyway, we can even turn off the hair individually, and those have now turned off. So just ways of turning off whole aspects of Cinema4D in one go in your scene. And if you're running really slow, sometimes it can be helpful to turn some of these things off. Also, something I hadn't realized is you can actually, and I probably should have turned hair back on again, but that's fine. I'm going to go to layers, and let's go ahead and actually add all of this stuff to a layer. I'm going to add these all to a new layer. I'm going to paint it up. So they're all in a layer, so we got this nice new layer here. We can actually, on an individual layer basis, turn off animation or generation or deformers or the Expresso or calculation stuff on a per layer basis. Very, very useful. Next up, we've got fast placement. So I love using this stuff. I used to do a lot of production renders, and you had to iterate things quickly. We had to really quickly change things and put things where we need them to be and be able to turn them all off really quickly. And let's go ahead and talk about this using this chair. So I've got this chair here, and I need to make a whole bunch of rows of chairs in very specific spots. Like, it's not just as simple as throwing them into a cloner and saying, make a grid of chairs. They need to be more specific. Let's go ahead and create a plane object. And I'm going to hit T for scale. Actually, let's hit NB so we can actually see the polygons. And I'm going to scale up this plane until it's big enough that each polygon's a little bit bigger than that chair. And I'll just leave this default. We could change the subdivisions, but that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and make that editable. And let's go ahead and select some rows. Let's go ahead and hit UL, which is going to grab entire loops here. In fact, I'm going to hit Command A, Command or Control A, and select everything. And I'm going to hold down Command or Control and start erasing out rows. So we got 3 rows, 3 rows, 3 rows. Let's just get rid of that back row. Let's say we've got an aisle here. The fire marshal is very particular. You got to get rid of that aisle. Let's get rid of that one. So cool. We got some different aisles going. We got this very specific layout. Now we can go ahead, and I actually have to put that in there. I shouldn't have, but let's go to Select and then click Set Selection. There's no shortcut. So we click Set Selection, and now that's there, and we could name if we want to. We can just go ahead and even call that Chairs. And now we can go ahead and create a cloner. Let's go ahead and make the chair a child of the cloner, and let's clone onto an object, and the object is going to be that plane. So as soon as I drop that in, it's going to create a chair on each point. We don't want that. We want it to be on each polygon center, but we actually don't want that. We want it to be limited to this selection. And now you can see, and let's change my display mode, now you can see that we're getting these rows of chairs very quickly. In fact, it'll be even quicker if we turn on render instances. And now we've got all these chairs getting copied exactly where we want them to. And even better than that, when the client comes in and they say, hey, actually that's too many rows of chairs, or the fire marshal said we need the rows to be wider, and then we've got a VIP section and they're too crammed in, they want more space between them, then we can go over here and start alternating some of these chairs for our VIP section. And now we just override our selection tag. We'll click on it and say select, set selection. We overrode that, and now we have our wider aisles, and we've got our VIP seating where they have more room. We can hide our original plane, and they're being placed very specifically and very quickly exactly where they want them to be. And I mean, in spite of this running very quick, if you have a very complicated scene, it's really useful to be able to just hit that checkbox right there and turn off all your chairs until it's like, oh, it's time to render. Let's turn the chairs back on again. And then, continuing the theme of fast placement, here's another scene file. I've got all these cute little trees. Let's go paint some trees around. So I'm going to create a cloner, and let's go and feed all the trees into the cloner. It's going to be making clones of trees, but I don't want them to be doing that. I want it to be a object. So it's going to be cloning onto an object. But what is that object going to be? Well, what I'm thinking is let's make another plane, and I'm going to give it only 1 polygon. So it's 1 width, 1 height. And we're going to make it really tiny. So a width of 1, a height of 1. So it's a really tiny little polygon. Now, what we could do is say, cloner, I want you to clone onto this plane. Now, I don't want to clone onto the points. I want to clone onto the polygon center. Now, you will see that they're rotated to the wrong orientation. So let's go to our transform tab and make sure they're rotated correctly. I always guess wrong. Okay, second try. Negative 90 MP, and it is facing upward. So now you can see it's cloning onto this plane, and that's fine, but it's not quick to make copies of it. So what I'm thinking is, what if we made the good old reliable connect object. So let's create a connect object. Let's throw the plane into the connect. And now let's tell the cloner to be cloning onto the connect object. So now I do that. It's the exact same thing, except what's cool is now I can make a duplicate of that plane. I'm going to turn off Y so I can easily move this. I can now make duplicates of this plane, and with a very, very low poly object, start making duplicates. And this cloner just becomes an instancer. We're just making a bunch of instances and being able to place the stuff exactly where we want to. Now, if you want to randomly distribute them, you could just go and put them in the cloner and randomize them and place them randomly. But if you wanted to be pretty particular about exactly where these should be going, this is a very simple layout of ways of placing this exactly where you want them to be. I can even grab all of them. Let's make a copy of all of them, and let's move all of these over here. But we're seeing the pattern, so let's go ahead and rotate it. So, okay, cool, that pattern gets broken up. I could even randomly grab a few of them and then move those over here. So now we've very specifically gone and distributed all these. And just like with the chairs, if it's taking too long and your scene isn't refreshing quickly, even though this one is, you can just so easily turn off your cloner, but you do still have, I guess they're a little tiny to see. We could go and grab all these planes and make them a lot larger. Let's set them up to like 11. We can now see exactly where the trees are being placed, but in a very low poly fashion. And then all we have to do is, once again, turn on the cloner, and it will clone onto every single one of those. So very fast placement. We've got soft body forces. I love finding techniques for art directing your dynamics. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I use it all the time. So let's go ahead and talk about some cool ways of using this. So I've got the NAB logo here, and it's already been all separated out into separate objects. Now I want to go ahead and make these dynamic. So I'm going to select all of them, and let's right click, and let's add on a simulation tag, add a rigid body, and let's turn off gravity. So I'm going to hit Command or Control D, and then we got dynamics, general, and then we've got our gravity right there. So let's set that to 0. So there's no gravity. If I hit play, there's going to be a problem. They're all going to explode and fly away from each other. That's because they're got some concave shapes going on here. And they're not observing that. They're not respecting that. So we have to select all of our dynamics tags, and let's go ahead and set the shape under collision, the shape to moving mesh. And now if I hit play, nothing should move. They are dynamic and they're floating in space, but they're not moving because they're not colliding with each other, so they're not moving. So now what do we want to do? Well, we want to create a wind. We want to create a force. So I'm going to go to Simulate, Particle, Wind. So now we've got wind. I'm going to go ahead and grab this wind, and let's spin it off to the side over here. And let's just go ahead and hit play, and right away you're going to see all of our letters start blowing off to the side, which is really cool. I love using these forces on dynamics. You can control so much with it. But we need to give this some sort of fall off. So let's go ahead and pull it down, and I'm going to grab the wind. Let's go to fall off, and I'm going to give it a spherical fall off. So cool, we got a cute little spherical fall off. If I hit play, nothing's going to be happening, but as I go and I pull this up, you're going to see that's going to hit. Let's when it refreshes, I need to see it. When it hits, now you see that this is actually going to start blowing the object. But there's actually a little bit of a problem. You'll see that when I move this wind up and I touch the N, that the N is blowing perfectly off to the side. But that's not behaving too much like wind. Wind would be affecting the object. Like if I hit this part, you'd want the wind to be blowing just that bottom part. What's happening right now is it's finding the center of mass of every single one of these rigid bodies, and the wind only affects it if the wind touches that axis, if it's hitting the center of mass. So as an alternative, what we can do, something that's super powerful with these dynamics, is if we change these rigid bodies to soft bodies. So to do that, all we have to do is select our dynamics tags, go to soft body, change it from where it says soft body off. Let's make it made of polygons and lines. So now if I hit play, nothing's going to happen. But, oh, and something I forgot. Let's go back to our dynamics tag. These are soft bodies, but I don't want them to behave like soft bodies. I want them to behave like rigid bodies as far as being very stiff. So I'm going to go to our volume or shape conservation stiffness. I'm going to jump that up to 111. So like just crank it up really high. So now it's super stiff. They're almost like rigid bodies. But what's great about soft bodies is that every single point is being calculated separately. So if I bring my wind up here, and you see if I just touch the corner of this N, only those points are being blown by the wind, which means it's starting to spin it around. Wherever I move this wind, it's affecting it on a point-by-point basis, where I could actually start blowing the bottom of the bee, but then go over here and start blowing the top of the bee. And we're now getting very, very specific control of how these things are moving based on this wind, based off fall-off, based off individual points on the object. This gives so many possibilities for different ways of affecting this. And I could go on and on about different techniques here, but I'm just going to show it in a slightly more complicated form here. We've got this scene file, and it's already set up with soft bodies, and let me just show you what we've got. We've got a little bit of random turbulence blowing everything around, and then I've got two different winds. This wind is blowing down, and this wind is blowing up to kind of keep the letters trapped in between the two of them. And then I've got a friction, and the friction is doing a good job of just draining energy out from the scene. And then here's the key part, and the super powerful thing, is I've got a wind inside of a cloner. And the cloner is set to an array, a radial rather, and it's spinning a bunch of winds around. And if I were to grab the cloner, we can go to the transform tab, and you can see I can rotate these. So you can see they're blowing mostly inside, but also a little bit off to the right. And if you've ever used the rotator, if we go to simulate particles rotation, it doesn't quite behave the way you think it would. Like, it kind of is affecting where it goes and how fast it goes. It's not very intuitive. But now we've created a series of winds, and these winds, by the way, do have a cylindrical fall off. So there's a little bit of fall off to them. But if I were to go ahead and hit play, all of our letters are now kind of caught in this little tornado whirlwind. Each of these winds is blowing around. So, and this only in R18 started working, where you could actually put forces inside of a cloner and they continue to work. It's crazy. It's super powerful, and I absolutely love it. So these can be blowing around via that wind. And we have so much control here just with this simple setup. Like with our friction, I could say, you know what? Friction's gonna be a lot higher, and now it's draining the energy out from the scene a lot more. Or we could go and grab our turbulence and crank that up to be way higher, and now it's gonna be blowing them around more so they're not pinched in quite as much. Or we could grab our wind and make it stronger or make it weaker. I could slow them down by lowering this, and now the turbulence is taking over, but we're getting them all bouncing around a lot. So we've got this very, very controllable shape. And this would actually work still pretty well if it was on a rigid body, but works even better on soft body, where every single point is part of the calculation. So combining forces with soft bodies, incredibly powerful. And then in R18, being able to clone a series of them, even more powerful. So last one on this bit is we've got gradients. So let's go ahead and talk about gradients. There's a couple techniques in gradients that are really fun to do. So I'm just gonna open up my sky gradient here, and let's jump on in, and you can see I've got this gradient going. Now I can right away, well, let's just say I'm going to reset it. Let's go ahead and say reset to default. So we got our black to white gradient. Something I often need things to do is go from white to black to white, or the opposite. Let's go white. Let's go black to white to black. So the way I usually do that is I don't want to recolorize and click that and then go and make it black. A quicker way of doing that is usually just pull the black over and steal some more black from that side. So now, normally, if you want to distribute these properly, I'd grab it and drag it over and grab this and maybe move it to where it looks like it's in the middle, but it's almost never not. So I can click in there and that's pretty close, but I'd set that to like exactly 50. There's an easier way. Let's go ahead and set that up so it's wrong again, the way I had it. So it's like, okay, that should be kind of the middle, that should be the edge. Instead of going and doing the math or lining it up perfectly, I can just right-click on the gradient and say, distribute knots. And it's going to make the leftmost one go all the way left, rightmost all the way right, and take everything else and distribute them evenly between all of them. Very, very useful. So along those lines, I could go and say, I need another white. It's not going to be perfectly white, but I can do that, and I can right-click and say, distribute knots, and now they're evenly divided every quarter. I guess it's a third, but you know, there's 4 dots evenly distributed now. And then, so that's distribution, but we can also right-click and say, double knots. So we can click on double, and now I've got double the line. I can do it again, double again, one more time, double again. So we got all these duplicates here. Now we've actually got 2 black dots pinched up against each other because it was like the leftmost one and the rightmost one, and they're butted up against each other now. But I can right click and say distribute knots, and now the blacks have separated from each other. And now we've got more of an even pattern being distributed throughout here. So I'm going to go ahead and reset that again. It's just very, very useful to be able to control gradients that way. I used to do all of those manually. And even if you right click, there's also invert, so you can flip it from one side to the other. So that can also be very useful. So yeah, some quick shortcuts there by right clicking on your gradient and being able to just get a little bit more control over that a little bit quicker. And imagine making, I'm going to go ahead and do this, double the knots, double again, and then double again, and then double again, and then double again. How long would it take you to make these dots? I remember doing that type of thing manually, where I would be making this as big as I could on my screen and then moving these dots individually before I realized this was a thing that you could do. Very powerful, very cool. And yeah, that should wrap this one up. So thanks everybody from Grayscale Gorilla. And once again, go ahead and visit greyscalegorilla.com for more tutorials and more training and more tips and tricks and techniques. And and that the one slide is broken, so cool. And I'm on Twitter and on Instagram and on all the things. I am at Chris Schmidt 3D. So thanks for watching, and bye bye.